different classification, and we have to figure out like what activities, like in the weight room or something, that they use for that sport.
that you would use to
And why, how to justify why we have to.
So is it only you that can get there?
It was a class, bro.
I just need a flip phone.
It's cool, it's
All right.
Damn, it's the razor, man. The razor. That was the one. Excuse me, sir? Say that again.
If you be good, but about 5 minutes
Maybe I
long.
should just be a police officer. I think I would pretty well.
Yeah, my mom, sir.
I think I get it. Is that, we were just gonna start this bit, right? Okay.
His name's Sneak. You know today.
All right.
I'm sorry, this keyboard.
It's my
So
YouTube
we looked,
video. Check me out, League of Legends.
Don't you look at stops?
I'm sorry. The sun is shining. Take a deep breath. It's Friday. It will be okay.
Right? Right?
All right. So we looked at vision, right? And we want to quickly look at some idea about kinesthesis, right? So kinesthesis is, how do I tell where I am without having to look? Okay? Or how do I tell what an object is without having to look? Right? So kinesthesis, this awareness of what's going on, occurs because we get information from sensory organs that we call proprioceptors. Right? Proprioception contributes to body awareness, spatial awareness, directional awareness, object awareness. Right? We've got two main categories. If we look at proprioceptors as an umbrella term, then we have two categories here. Somatosensors, so muscle spindles, little receptors that are actually embedded in the muscle. Golgi tendon organs, joint receptors. And then we have a whole range of global cutaneous receptors. So there are different little types of cells that recognize pressure. There are different cells that recognize temperature, okay, within the layers of the skin, within the cutaneous layers. The other type of proprioceptor is the vestibular apparatus. And the vestibular apparatus is located in our ear, and it's made up of several different pieces that are put together. So we have semicircular canals, utricles, and saccules. All right? So they each do a different job for us within the vestibular apparatus. So briefly, we come back. Those of you that took the classes back to front will recognize this information from 313. If you're doing 212 first, we'll come back and look at muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs in a little more detail in exercise physiology. Right? But muscle spindles are sensory organs that can recognize change in length of the muscle. So they send information to the brain about the speed at which the muscle is being stretched or how much stretch is being put on the muscle. All right? So that plays an important role when we're trying to understand the movement that is occurring. All right? How much stretch is on the muscle when I'm walking versus when I'm running. Okay? Golgi tendon organs are located, so muscle spindles are within the muscle itself, right? Golgi tendon organs are at the junction where the muscle is turning into tendon. So they're at that junction there. And they monitor tension on the muscle or the force that the muscle is creating. So again, that's really an important idea when we're doing movement skills, because our brain has to know, right, given the outcome of the skill, did I create enough force in the muscle? If I don't know what's happening down at the muscle, then I can't judge whether or not I need to tweak how many motor units I turn on, how much muscle I turn on to achieve the skill. Okay. Also, I want to know if there's any chance of that muscle getting hurt because there's too much tension in the muscle. So I want to be able to recognize that. And then we have joint receptors, lots, and there's several different versions of joint receptors within the joint capsule that tell me, okay, I'm only moving my arm within a small range, or I'm moving my arm to the limit of my range. Right? The vestibular apparatus plays a massive role when we start looking at particularly balance, being able to go upside down, twisting, any of these kinds of actions. So gymnasts, dancers, skaters, divers tend to have very good awareness of the information that is coming to their brain from the vestibular apparatus. Some other sports don't use that information to the same extent and don't do a lot of work that would train the brain to recognize that information.
So gymnasts, compared to football, ones that do like the mat routines and balance bar.
Yes. So if I'm twisting this way and I'm somersaulting this way at the same time, how do I know what's up, what's down, where the floor is? Am I coming down on my head? Am I coming down on my feet? Right? That's what the vestibular apparatus does for us. But it also works just standing, right? It's very sensitive. So if I'm swaying too much, it's going to let me know that I need to contract more muscles to stay on balance. So it can give your brain information about rotation, angular acceleration, or linear acceleration, so how fast am I going? And then we've got tactile information, and remember we talked about what the brain can learn haptically. So when we watch children playing with toys, what is their brain learning? If you were on the playground this morning, the second group, Wes, Clark and Trenton.
Hey, Wesley, man, boy.
Clark is such a leader and Trenton is such a follower.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
We need like a little section just for you.
You do. You seriously do. Trenton, though, if you notice, Trenton spent a lot of time picking up sand and playing with sand. So for some reason at this point in time, his brain is learning something, plus he's being a bit of a pillar. But I do think that the persistence at wanting to dig his fingers into the sand and feel the sand is something that his brain is trying to learn. Yeah, Clark. It's interesting, right? Clark versus Ellie. Because Ellie and Clark are twins.
I like angels. There's
Little angel, he's cute. He is quite cute.
Do they have different kids out there?
No, but they don't.
You like him?
But sometimes the parents don't.
That's what he sounds like.
Like we had a lot of kids missing today. We were very short on children today. It is.
That's why it was hard to
It's
show.
Easter. We're not supposed to have class today or Monday. It's Good Friday and Monday is Easter Monday. I'm supposed to.
You can go.
Ryan and Shabasier and I are supposed to be on holiday today.
Me too.
No,
Everybody.
Why are they not?
all right.
Oh, yeah, it's American.
All right, so what we think when we look at development of these receptor organs is that some of them appear to be functioning prenatally because the receptor organs are responsible for the reflexes that we talked about. Right? If the brain doesn't know that the stimulation is occurring, the brain can't create the reflex response. So in order to see the reflex, there has to be a sensory organ at play. All right? And since we see some reflexes while the baby is still in the womb, so they kick, Mum will tell you guys, you'll see it later in the pregnancy.
That's the weirdest thing.
Right? It is very peculiar. They kick, they suck their thumb sometimes. Right? There's all kinds of reflexes that we see before they're born. So that means then that some of those receptors must be functioning at that point. Otherwise the brain wouldn't be able to create a kick.
They're not kicking though.
Is it?
They're not kicking. Well, they're not kicking, the brain is kicking. They're not voluntarily kicking. This is very true. So, yay! So, once they're born, newborns respond pretty immediately to touch. So we see a reflex where if you stroke their cheek, they turn their head that way, right? So there's two things going on there. One, they had to recognize they were being touched. Two, the brain had to recognize the location of the touch to turn the head in the right direction, right? So there's two pieces of information that the brain is picking up straight away, because we get that reflex immediately. It's linked to the sucking reflex so that they can find the breast and get food, right? So we see that straight away, so we know that those are working. The vestibular apparatus, the structure of the vestibular apparatus is complete around the end of the first trimester. So that's about week 12 of the pregnancy. And once the baby is born, we know that by 8 weeks, that vestibular apparatus has to be functioning at some extent, again because of the reflex. When we look at that labyrinthine reflex, the one where if we tip them, their head stays here, well, the brain wouldn't know they were being tipped if the vestibular apparatus was not functioning at some degree. Right? So we don't know precisely when it starts, but we know that by 8 weeks it's certainly working at some level. Right? Now, unfortunately, we've got a little bit of information about the starting point of development and what's going on, not enough. We don't know very much, really, about kinesthetic development. We also don't know very much at the other end, at the other end of the spectrum. When we look at an aging population, we don't have a lot of research information there either. We do see some adults lose some sensitivity. So, for example, they perhaps will start to, one of the ones that is problematical from a lifestyle point of view, they start to lose the sensation of heat or pressure in their fingers. Well, so then they don't know if they put their hand on something that's too hot, right? Or they don't know whether they're applying enough pressure to open the door or turn the key in the car, or, right? It gets very frustrating for them. Yes, Jeremy?
Is that the same thing with, like with people on diabetes and like they can't feel?
It is similar. Yeah, that it is a similar scenario. Diabetes is a little bit more to do with actual damage to the nerves because of the glucose insulin imbalance, but the outcome is similar, I believe, yes. So probably some of the information they're getting is not very accurate anymore because of the degradation on the neural pathway. We're not quite sure. As I said, we just don't have enough information. But the vestibular apparatus stuff, that's really crucial. We need to know more about what is happening with that because of the impact on posture and balance. If we are going to help falls and prevent falls in an elderly population, we should know what is going on here because this plays a big role in helping the brain maintain balance. And we just don't know enough. You know, we're at the point we know we've got to keep legs strong, and we know if we do balance training that they get better at it, but we don't know the role and what is happening functioning-wise here. All right, so using kinesthesis then, we can perceive location and tactile points. So if you take a look, there's a nice photo, let me just have a look which page that is. There's a good photo of a way of testing this, but you can do it to yourself just using two sharp pencils. Right? On page 221, there's a photograph that shows how they test this. So the idea is that we want to know whether I'm being touched with two things or with one thing. Right? When we're younger, the two things have to be quite a long way apart for us to be able to distinguish that there's two. The closer they get, the more we start to think there's only one. As we get older, we get more sensitive to that information, and we're able to tell to quite close that there's two pricks, not one prick. Objects, right? We've already talked a lot about objects. Can I tell the ball is bumpy without looking at the ball?
Yes.
Right? We can as adults, because the brain can learn that information. Right? Different body movements or placement of body. Where is the body? Is it upside down? Is it right side up? Limb movements. So do I have to look at my arm to know how far it's moving or where it's moving? No, right? We can test that in a lab because I can stick your hand behind the curtain and have you draw or move the hand and say, okay, move your hand 45 degrees. We're pretty accurate at that even though we can't see our hand, right? But if you think about it, that's great in the lab. Who cares what we can do in the lab, right? It's boring. When would that be useful in your sport? When would it be useful in your sport to know how much an arm or a leg has moved without having to look at it?
Soccer, long jump, triple jump,
Possibly.
pole, just jump.
Why?
That's cheating.
Or you think, is that a sport where you, is diving a sport?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
You want to know where you are in relation to the ball because it hurts when you hit the ball. Right? What about who thinks when you baseball or softball or tennis or cricket that you watch the ball to the bat?
You have to, baseball, what you talking about?
Well,
Am I right?
What do you think, Scott?
Don't you watch the ball with the bat?
Don't they do this? Don't you
Right?
swing?
Don't, right? We often coach and tell people watch the ball onto the racket, but actually, when you watch really, really good, well-trained athletes, they do not watch the ball to the racket or the bat, right? Because they've already decided on the movement, and they're looking at where they're going to hit the ball and how much chance they've got to run. Right? In tennis, they watch the ball over the net, and then they're looking at what they're going to do next. Where is the opponent going? Right? So, how do I do that? How do I look where I'm going to go if I have to watch the ball onto the racket? Right? How do I know if I'm creating the shot properly if I'm not watching the shot? Right? If I'm kicking a soccer ball, sorry, what if you're taking a penalty kick?
You already made the choice of where you're going.
Right? Do you watch your legs swing into contact with the ball? Or are you looking at what movements the goalie might be making to see if you can fake him out? Right? How do I know I'm actually going to make contact with the ball if I don't watch my foot kick the ball? Well, I know where the ball is at. What's my brain learning? What's my brain know about my leg? Yeah, muscle memory doesn't exist exactly. Right? Muscles don't have memory.
You said it doesn't exist? Muscle memory does exist? It has to.
No.
Isn't it like once you get past
Muscles don't have memory cells. There's
Brain
no,
memory, bro.
there's no such thing as muscle memory.
then how do them old dudes still have like the big muscles when they lived when they was young?
Because that has nothing to do
It's
with
not-
Oh, like,
We're talking about formation.
Hey, back to your question, bro, don't worry about what nobody says.
You know,
that's something, this,
your brain learns a movement pattern that it will initiate. And once you've learned that pattern very, very well, it takes a lot to forget it. How many of you ride a bicycle? What if when you leave school, you move to Boston and they have a really cool transit system and you don't use your bike for the next 15 years?
you can still come back and ride
You
it.
still come back and get on the bike because it's a very well-learned skill. It's not muscle memory. It's a memory.
It's seriously like,
It isn't. Trust me.
I missed it, man.
like lifting and stuff.
No, when you lift, if you train, that's physiological. If you lift and then you take time off, when you come back, you get back into lifting quicker than you would have done the first time around. It's physiological. It's not muscle memory.
Mama say muscle memory.
The growth that you made when you established, that's
See, in my book, I
Yes.
Hey, where's the medulla oblongata?
Because you never go all the way back to where you were when you started. I mean, you would have to take a massive amount of time off.
They're out to be atrophy.
Yo, I'm calling you Bobby, bro.
So, spatial orientation and direction, I want to be able to perceive the difference, right, in the direction of something, which way am I going? So when we look at tactile localization, we know newborns can feel touches, right? But the ability to distinguish 2 versus 1 touch improves across early childhood. And by about 5, 6, or 7 or so, they're pretty good at telling the difference between 1 or 2 that are close together. All right, so we think it's relatively mature before the age of 7. We don't know completely, but we think it is. It also seems to follow one of our directional laws, proximo-distal. So they're better at telling the difference close to the midline, and it develops out to the fingers. Okay, so we can tell 2 versus 1 better in our upper arm than we can on the back of our hand initially. Takes a little while to develop out there. So, haptic perception, we said that infants explore objects manually. They also explore objects orally, right? Because the mouth has hundreds, thousands of nerve endings, and so they can create a very good image of an object. Right, so all that chewing on everything and sticking every time they pick something up, they stick it in their mouth. It's like the parent's nightmare because the floor is dirty, and as soon as they touch it, it's going in their mouth. Right? That's the way it goes because they can get a lot of information. In fact, the research shows that if you put a baby, say you put a baby in a high chair and you turn the lights off and you give it a toy, right? It will mouth the toy, it might touch the toy. If you take the toy away, turn the lights on and give them 4 or 5 toys, it can pick out the toy that you gave it in the dark. So it can get enough information by touching it and mouthing it to be able to recognize it visually. That's massive because it had to be able to build a picture of what that object was like in order to then visually recognize it.
It's not muscle memory.
So we also see then another directional law here, Kepler-Caudal, right? We do a lot of mouthing, and then we do a lot of touching, and then we can touch things with our feet, right? So touch sensitivity develops caudally as well as proximo-distally. Right? By 5, they're still a little more sensitive around their face than they are, but from their hands. So one of the things you might see with the children on the playground is if you go up and you go to touch their face, they might be a little more reactive to that than if you go up and you squeeze their hand. Right? So some children are some people even as adults, are very unnerved if people touch them on the face. They'd rather shake your hand or pat your arm because this is very sensitive. Right? We get a lot of information from that. It feels very personal.
Is that like determined on comfort, like with the person?
For most people, I would say yes. For some people, no. It's like for some people, getting them to go upside down, just their brain does not want to go upside down. It doesn't matter what you do to try to teach them a forward roll or a handstand or anything. You cannot, they will not. At some point, in order to do those skills, you have to put your head down. And they'll fight the whole time to keep their head out here. Okay? That sensitivity to certain stimuli for some people is just too much. And certain cognitive development issues are to do with sensitivity to the stimuli as well. Let's see, what else have we got? Body awareness. So that is partly awareness of where my body is and what it's doing, right? That's part of what would be under this area. But also, I have to be able to be aware of my arms and my legs. I've got to be aware that I have 2 of these and that I can do different things with them all, right? In the warm-up on the playground, I'll often do touch your knees, touch your bottom, touch your ankles. Can you touch your elbows? Sometimes they don't know where their elbows are. Depends how much practice they've done. Right? So, how big am I? Right? So can I label my body parts? Do I know where they are? Right? By 8, 9, they're really good at that. They've kind of got them all down pat. Right now, sometimes they get them wrong. Spatial dimensions, so they get up, down first, and then they get in front and in back. So certainly our second group have in front and in back. Some of the younger ones in the other way around. First group. Some of the younger ones in the second group may not have front back yet. And what you find is when they're learning that, they're quite good at doing it for themselves, in relation to themselves. So if you say, okay, put the ball in front of you, they might be able to do that. If you say, put the ball in front of the box, they might put it somewhere else, right? So it takes time to transfer that understanding to another object. And then the last one to develop is laterality, so understanding sides of the body and the fact that they're distinct from each other. I can move them separately, I don't have to move them together. Right? So by 4 to 5, so again our older group, the first group out, are pretty good at knowing that they have a left and a right. They don't always label it properly. Takes a little bit of time, so sometimes even 8, 9-year-olds still get left and right muddled up. Okay, but if a lot of these ideas depend upon how much practice they get, and the children at our centre, the way that curriculum works over there, they get a lot of practice at working on left and right. So laterality then leads to an idea of lateral dominance. Which side do I prefer? So not everybody, some people don't prefer a side. They're ambidextrous, right? You don't meet very many. Most of us prefer right or left, right? So we're right-handed or we're left-handed when we use our pen. If we look at preferences with babies, they do seem to show a preference, particularly when they start to reach and grasp around 3 months. But there's not necessarily a link. So if they're reaching with that hand at 3 months, doesn't mean that they're going to be that side dominant when they're older. Right? At the moment, we don't seem to know that there's that it shows any link with what happens later on. Whether I'm right or lefty, by about 4, they've got an idea. Tends to be pretty set by around 4. When I was young, I can remember in primary school that we were still in the kind of problem about pure dominance and right-handed and left-handed versus right and left brain. Anyone who was left-handed was made to write right-handed. You weren't allowed to write left-handed when I was in school. So things have changed a lot, thank goodness, because we used to think that right-handed, left-brained made you better academically or some other nonsense, right? And so they wouldn't let, they would wanted to train people to all be right-handed. Okay, so if I have a right-handed signature, we tend to also see a dominant eye, a dominant ear. So next time you use your phone, which ear do you put your phone to? Okay. Is it the same as the hand that you use? If you change it, does it feel as comfortable? Can you hear as well? Right? Footedness. So for many of us who don't ever play soccer or a game where you're allowed to kick a ball, we don't ever learn that we have a footedness, right? What footedness are you? Right? Is it the same as your hand? Okay. So in gymnastics, I cartwheel on my right foot, right? So we see gymnasts who cartwheel left and gymnasts who cartwheel right. Okay? So certain sports we're more aware of lateral dominance, right? If it's pure, right, then we have what we say is unilateral dominance. And back in the 60s, as I said, they had some really weird ideas about pure dominance, that they thought that pure dominance was important for perceptual motor skills and that you would be uncoordinated and you would struggle with perceptual motor skills like threading a needle or tying your shoelaces or catching a ball if you didn't have pure dominance. There really isn't any research to support that anymore, thank goodness, all right? But I may be pure, so I may have unilateral. Everything is right-sided or everything is left-sided, or I can be mixed. So I could be right-eyed but left-handed, for example. Okay. I also need to be able to perceive spatial orientations, right? Directionality, limb movement. Directionality is an important one and it's linked to laterality. So once I know left and right, can I tell if I'm going left or I'm going right? Or the ball is going left or right? Okay. Transposing left and right gets better as we get older. So if you talk to the children on the playground who can tell left and right, and you ask them which hand you're lifting, they're going to tell you that you're lifting the one on the side of their body. Okay? But as adults, if I ask Nick, which hand am I lifting? Right? He knows I'm lifting the left, even though it's on his right. Okay? So that's something we learn to transpose, that kind of mirror image. So it's really difficult. If you work with kindergarten kids, if you're going to be PE teacher in kindergarten, you've got to be a little bit careful about that. Because if you say, okay, we're going to run to our right, and you're standing in front of them, and you wanted them to run to their right, some of them are going to run left. Right? In aerobics classes, even with adults, if you don't practice it a lot, it can be tricky sometimes. So in aerobics classes, do I stand and face my class, right? In which case, it can be very useful to learn to go, okay, let's go left. All right, let's go right. It's actually quite difficult to do that. Right? I'm going to say something different to what I'm actually doing. That takes some practice. Or am I going to have mirrors in my classroom so we can all go left and we can all go right? Right? So there's things about laterality and this idea about directionality that can impact behaviors that you might see later on. All right, so our third sensation, all right, our third set of senses that we would think about in relation to sport, because obviously we have a sense of taste and we have a sense of smell. But do I use those on the sport field? Okay. I use them if I'm cooking, so we use them for motor skills maybe, but I don't know if we use them very much in relation. Do I use
You can
taste?
taste it when you get cotton out to dehydrated. You know what I'm saying?
That's a good
You know
point.
what I'm saying? I'm
That's
on
a
it
good
today.
point.
smartboard?
I'm on it today.
He's doing well today.
My bottom.
My father.
So sounds, though, can play a big role in sport performance and moving, right? And we tend to forget, because we pay so much attention to what we see and feel, we forget about what we hear that gives us cues in the environment as to what's happening. So, one of the arguments in tennis that has been going on for several years, and everybody keeps saying they're going to do something about it, but they don't because very famous tennis players do this, is grunting. Okay? Because grunting, doesn't matter how much Sharapova and Azarenka tell you they grunt because that's what they learn as they hit the ball. Sharapova may not play,
The
so
cheater that took
could be
steroids.
irrelevant, right? It's possible, will be nice, right? It is possible that it's deliberate because how the ball sounds on the strings gives the opponent a clue about what you're doing with the ball. So if I grunt really loudly and you can't hear, did the ball hit my sweet spot? Did the ball hit off center? Did I put tons of power on that ball or less power than it looks like I put on the ball because I didn't quite get the center of the racket? If they can't hear that, that's a whole lot of information you took away from their brain to help them make the decision about how to respond to the ball. Okay? So grunting could be a form of cheating, in a way.
No.
Don't believe that at all.
No.
You don't think so?
You should take it off.
All right? Critical cues that we don't realize we're getting, information that we don't always consciously pay attention to. So I can tell the location of something by its sound. All right? So if someone with heels, any of the girls got heels on? None of us have heels on. If someone with heels on walks along the corridor, can you tell by the sound whether they're walking towards the toilets or towards the outside door?
Yes, you can. You can tell if there's stilettos.
You can, exactly, right? You can. There's all kinds of information that you can get. Throw some water on it. Information you can get from sound, all right? So I can tell the location of something. I can tell differences in similar sounds. So do I say a B or a D? Right? If you can't see my mouth, am I saying B or D, D or B? They're very similar. And often we will use visual cues because I make a slightly different shape with my mouth if I'm saying a B to a D. Okay? But if you have good hearing, and you're not working with someone who has speech issues, so the speech therapists do a lot of work on the sound that someone makes, because it's an important cue for the other person to be able to understand what they're saying. Think about the children on the playground who do not speak clearly. Okay? It's very difficult to hold a conversation because they're clearly trying to tell you something and they get frustrated because you can't recognize the sound. So differences in similar sounds is very important. Close your eyes for a minute. Everybody close your eyes. Close your eyes. All right. What kind of ball am I throwing?
Tennis ball.
How did you know? Right? If I had thrown the hacky sack we were playing with on Wednesday, would that have sounded the same?
No.
So not only do you know what kind of ball I'm throwing, you know the material the ball is made of, right? Just by hearing the sound the ball makes. I can't catch.
Wow.
I told you I couldn't catch, guys. All right, so we can learn all kinds of information from the sound. We learn patterns in the sound, right? So if I'm listening to music, is the music a waltz? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Depends on how you.
Or is it hop 1, 2, 3, hop 1, 2, 3? In which case it's a, can't remember, oh my gosh, all my years of ballet just went away. Yes, quite. Right? So we learn patterns in the music based upon the intensity. Is it loud? Is it soft? Is it very fast? What's the frequency like? Right? What's the timing of one sound to the next sound? And we're also able to distinguish figure ground, which is very similar to figure ground that we looked at visually. Right? So if I am on a train and I'm trying to have a conversation with someone, and there's the noise of the train, and there's other people having conversations, and maybe someone is playing music, can I still hear the conversation? Right? The more background noise there is, perhaps the harder I find it. That's what we see as we get older. The older we get, the more difficult this becomes. So if I'm at a party, or if I'm in the room, let's say your grandma is in the room and she's trying to have a telephone conversation and it's annoying you because you're trying to watch the telly, so you keep turning the telly up.
Absolutely.
And she gets louder and louder. Or she has to walk away because at some point she can't distinguish the sound in the phone from the sound in the telly. Right? Figure ground. Unless it's really important. So if we're having all this blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah, Dr. Wolf has been going on now for 45 minutes. Oh my gosh. And I say, Jared. What did Jared do? He looked at me, right? Because Jared, your name is important.
Why is
It's
it
a thing of importance. So he can block out all the nonsense I'm talking about, but when I say his name, he has to look up at me.
Says time.
That's what I'm going to.
All right?
Hey, we got this tomorrow or next week.
All right. So, I want to just finish that slide on Monday, and then we will start the next chapter. When, please listen for 1 second, I know I'm a little bit late, but that clock is slow.
No, it's not.
When you look at this chapter, on page 229, they start a new section that they call intermodal perception. I want you to ignore that because it's really cool info. But they're starting to try to look at everything working together and the interaction between all the sections. I want you to focus on understanding They're separate senses, all right? So don't worry about the intermodal information.
Have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend, guys.
Happy Easter.
Well,